Citation needed. Hello, I am Anamultus, and I am here because I am commenting, or rather critiquing, a video that I saw about the ethnic nature of the biblical Israelites. So just before we start, let me give this disclaimer. I do not have anything against individuals of any ethnicity or any race. I just am here for historical accuracy and theological accuracy. That is what I'm interested in. I don't really have any political agenda behind this. I'm just looking at stuff on the internet, and I found something that I think doesn't really follow what I know about the historical record, and I decided to critique it. So there we go. So last video, if you have seen it, if you haven't, please go there, was mainly about some things about the Bible and what it said about Nimrod and Cush and stuff like that. And we only really dissected 3 clips of that. So hopefully today we will get a bit farther into the video, because man, if this, at the rate this is going, this might take several videos to get through. So let's get right into the action. I think it's important to, as I said last time, distinguish between the patrilineal ancestors of certain nations and actually the nations themselves. As such, Kush can't really be considered an empire in the sense as a person Kush, just like Mizraim can't be considered an empire in the person of Mizraim, and Nimrod cannot be considered an empire in the person of Nimrod, but rather they are individuals who are the ancestors of people that can be considered an empire, in a sense that, for example, Abraham is not the same as ancient Israel, because Abraham is one man and ancient Israel is a whole country. So there you go. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Let's slow down here. Remember episode 1, where they were trying to tell us that these black Palestinians were actually the indigenous inhabitants of a region, and now they're telling us, oh no, the Palestinians aren't the indigenous inhabitants of the region. So you really have to make up your mind, otherwise it's a little bit inconsistent. Let's just say that for now. I think the historical record is very clear that the Persians did not conquer Egypt and North Africa in the 7th century, and that it was in fact the Arabs that conquered Egypt and North Africa in the 7th century. I think the historical record is extremely clear on that. So, of course, if you'd like to debate this with perhaps some Arab historians, then please go ahead. I'm pretty sure that all their list of caliphs, maybe they're all wrong. Maybe they're all wrong. Maybe, just maybe, Uthman, Omar, Ali, all of those were just Persians disguised as Arabs. Just maybe. Or maybe they were just, in fact, Arabs. And the Arabs are, in fact, not the Persians, just like the Persians are not the Arabs, because things that are different are not the same. But perhaps you weren't really concerned about that. Perhaps the historical record might not just be too important to you. Perhaps, or perhaps Arabs and and Persians are the same to you. I don't know. But let's continue. I think it's important to notice that uh, that in Sudan, the majority of the people speak Arab, but a minority of the people speak Nilo-Saharan languages, which are unrelated to ancient Egyptian, which is an Afroasiatic language, along with Coptic, which is, I suppose, today's descendant of ancient Egyptian. So the pictures you're about to see from the video that this is based on, of course, will depict the individuals who are descendants of speakers of Nilo-Saharan languages. But let me show you a picture of actual speakers of Afro-Asiatic languages, specifically Coptic. And so here are some Copts. Do these people look to you like they have Nubian, well, not Nubian, the other people are Nubian, but do these people look like they have Negroid features? I mean, some of them do a little bit, but for the most part, they don't. I just want to point out that, yes, you are correct. Ancient Egyptians are definitely not as white as that man, but they certainly aren't as uniformly dark as many sub-Saharan African people are. Ancient Egyptians, of course, are more brownish. Of course, blackness and whiteness, it's not really a one or two thing. It's more a continuum of people are darker to certain shades depending on how much melanin they have in their skin. Of course, other features associated with that can also decide whether somebody is Caucasoid or Negroid, for example. Somebody can have really dark skin but still be Caucasoid. Uh, so let's move on then.
And Joseph's brethren came and bowed down themselves before him with their faces to the earth. And Joseph saw his brethren, and he knew them, but made himself strange unto them, and spake roughly unto them. And Joseph knew his brethren, but they knew not him. But they knew not him. But they knew not him.
Okay, I'm going to show you a couple of pictures here, or maybe just one. I'll decide later. But okay, in this picture, you can see Ramses the Great, or Ramses II, and he's fighting against Nubians. And it's clear to see that the Egyptians depicted the Nubians as being considerably darker than themselves. And as such, it stands to reason that since the Egyptians could clearly see a color difference between themselves and the Nubians, it's obvious that the Egyptians were not as dark as the Nubians. And also, going on that, the color in which somebody is depicted only really matters. Well, actually, no, it doesn't matter at all, in fact, because as we know from black Attic pottery, that black figure pottery in Greece, that the Greeks oftentimes depicted themselves as black, in the sense that the pottery that they made on top of them, the figures depicting the Greeks were black, even though the Greeks themselves were not black. And this has nothing to do with the fact of whether or not Greeks were black or not, but rather the materials that they used to color the pottery. And also, but the Egyptians, however, they did have colors, and as such, when we can see that the Egyptians are not as dark as the Nubians, it's clear to see that they are in fact not as dark as the video maker is implying. Additionally to that, it is a non sequitur to say that because well, because whatchamacallit, the um, Joseph's brothers were not able to recognize him immediately as being someone from their area, but rather that they weren't really able to distinguish him from the Egyptians. That's a non sequitur, because number one, the Egyptians, as we can clearly see by the fact that Joseph himself was traded as a slave to the Egyptians certainly would have had a lot of contact with other cultures nearby, which means that the Egyptians weren't one uniform color necessarily, and also that just because somebody is in Egypt doesn't mean that they're that certain color. Just like if somebody is in Germany doesn't mean they're white. Uh, or in Italy, there's blacks in Italy. I know that for a fact because I've been there. And another reason it's a non sequitur is, well, because it means that it's not necessarily as dark as. It also means that they may simply not have recognized him at all, in the sense that even if the Egyptians were a uniform color and Joseph was different, that doesn't mean that they automatically would recognize him as their long lost brother, because obviously he's going to be dressed in an Egyptian manner, and also they haven't seen him in years, so they may not have recognized him. So there's many ways to explain the fact that they did not recognize Joseph. That doesn't actually require you to believe that the Joseph's brothers and Joseph himself were the exact same skin color as the Egyptians, and this still doesn't exactly prove that the Egyptians were really dark either. So let's go on then. The next few seconds of a video basically repeat what has been said, so I'll just skip those for your benefit.
Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water, and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. And the shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and helped them, and watered their flock. And when they came to Reuel their father, he said, How is it that ye are come so soon today? And they said, An Egyptian delivered us.
Okay, like I said earlier, it's important not to stereotype one cultural group as being uniformly a certain color. And as such, for example, Moses. Okay, so we're talking about Moses now. Moses was mistaken for an Egyptian because, well, maybe he dressed like an Egyptian, spoke Egyptian, acted like an Egyptian, had manners like an Egyptian. Those are all very valid reasons why Moses could have been like an Egyptian. Also, maybe the Egyptians weren't necessarily as dark as the video maker implies, and that could certainly mean that, of course, the Israelites today are definitely whiter than they were back in those days. That's for sure. Which means that the Jews would have been a bit darker back in those days, especially after having been in Egypt. However, that does not mean that they are black, because that's a non sequitur. And also, even if Moses is adopted by the Pharaoh's daughter, it doesn't mean that he has to necessarily pass as the Pharaoh's daughter because he was adopted. It doesn't matter what color you are if you're adopted because you're adopted. It's not like they're trying to hide that fact that he was adopted or something, because he's definitely not in a line of succession anyway, because he's adopted by the Pharaoh's daughter, not the Pharaoh's son. Uh, so he wouldn't have to hide the fact that he was a different ethnicity, and also maybe the ancient Egyptians and Hebrews weren't too different in color, so that's definitely another thing. And also, the Midianites may have been the same color as the Egyptians and the ancient Hebrews, which means they would have not worked on the difference in color. They probably would have more recognized somebody by the difference in language or mannerism or the way they dressed. Because in a lot of documents, ancient documents, where you see people from different nations distinguished, it's usually by the way they dress. So you can look at, for example, rock cut inscriptions and such things, where you'll see different people from different lands being distinguished by the way they dressed, not by the skin color that they have. Because, sometimes people might be very similar in skin color, which is why skin color isn't really the best way to distinguish between different groups. So I think I've said all I want to say on that. Okay, but it's important to know that these skin colors are still within the range of known skin colors for Caucasoid populations in North Africa, because skin color itself doesn't really determine whether somebody is Caucasoid, Negroid, Mongoloid, Australoid, etc., because there's a very great variation in skin color of people within those defined races. For example, well, Australian Aborigines are believed to have had a genetic descent from people in Southeast Asia rather than people in Africa, but they themselves are actually pretty dark skinned. But they are not. They don't have the negroid features that people in sub-Saharan Africa have. So, skin color itself doesn't really matter too much when determining race. There's other features to take into account. It's important to recognize that not all decisions are made based on race. In fact, in most people's lives, very few, if any, decisions are made based on race. The reason Charlton Heston was chosen to portray Moses wasn't because he was white, but it was rather because he was a good actor.
And the Lord said furthermore unto him, Put now thine hand into thy bosom. And he put his hand into his bosom, and when he took it out, behold, his hand was leprous as snow. And he said, Put thine hand into thy bosom again. And he put his hand into his bosom again, and plucked it out of his bosom, and behold, it was turned again as his other flesh. As his other flesh.
I think this is a point where the video maker really has, I don't know whether intentionally or accidentally, stereotyped white people, in the sense that, have you ever seen somebody who was literally as white as snow? I have never seen anybody who is literally as white as snow. Maybe an albino might be out there somewhere who might be as white as snow. But it's important to know that white people aren't actually white, just like black people aren't actually black, uh, for the most part anyway. And as such, it would make sense that if somebody's hand turned leprous white as snow, it would be visible on almost anybody, unless somebody was literally the whitest of albinos, which is actually very rare and uncommon among all populations, really. It's a very rare and uncommon condition. But the video maker really has gone and stereotyped a little bit too far, I think.
And as Paul was led into the castle, he said unto the chief captain, May I speak unto thee? Who said, Canst thou speak Greek? Art not thou that Egyptian, which before these days madest an uproar, and leddest out into the wilderness 4,000 men that were murderers? Art not thou that Egyptian? Art not thou that Egyptian?
This is an excerpt from the Matthew Henry commentary, sourced from Josephus and Eusebius, and it talks about how there had been a revolt in nearby Egypt, where an Egyptian man promised to tear down the walls of Jerusalem, and as such, when the Romans in Jerusalem noticed that there was some unrest going on, they may have thought that Paul, who was the center of this unrest, may have been the culprit and thus have arrested him. Now, of course, this does not prove anything or have any problems besides the fact that maybe the Romans may have stereotyped all Eastern peoples, which the Romans are known to have stereotyped people of various ethnicities. We know that for a fact. So, going on the previous evidence from the video that I have commented on, this wouldn't really be any big problem, just like it wouldn't be any problem that Joseph or Moses were to be mistaken for an Egyptian, because, of course, it's a Middle Eastern people group, of course, along with the Jews. And in addition to that, Greeks and other people had also moved into Egypt by this time in history, and as such, Egyptians were probably not of any uniform color, and as such, it would not have been easy to identify somebody as an Egyptian simply by skin color. So it's just a simple case of mistaken identity, because they weren't mistaking him for just any Egyptian. They were mistaking him for a very specific Egyptian, and it wasn't because of how he looked, but rather by the unrest in Jerusalem that they believed may have been associated with the actual Egyptian. So if you'd like to read the excerpt, then please pause the video and you can read that. But other than that, I think that's all I'll cover for today on the video. I've actually covered more than I did last time, and hopefully you liked it. If you have anything to say at all, please do comment, even if it's against what I've said. I'm glad to hear it, because if I hear something and I believe what you say, then I'll make a correction in the next video to ensure that I am not being inaccurate, or that I have not misrepresented anything, any bit of information. In addition to that, if you liked the video, please do leave a like. If you want to see more, please do subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter and on Gmail. The links are in the description below. You can watch the original video that this is based on. You can watch also the previous videos in this series. I put them in a playlist for easy viewing, and watch the next video after this one. I'm pretty sure I'll be making one soon because, of course, I make videos one day at a time, just like people live one day at a time. So thank you all for watching, and I will be seeing you all next time on Awiltos over and out.